The summer heat in Chico, California had turned brutal by August 1882, and Rose Valen stood in front of the general store watching three women she had once considered friends laugh behind their gloved hands while pointing directly at her. She clutched her basket tighter, feeling the familiar burn of shame crawl up her neck as their words carried across the dusty street with deliberate cruelty. "Can you imagine Rose thinking any man would want her?" Martha's voice rang out like a bell. "She actually told me she dreams of falling in love and getting married." Love? Caroline's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "A woman built like that should be grateful if any man looks her way at all, let alone offers love." Rose forced herself to move forward, her soft body feeling heavier with each step as she passed them. Her curves had always been generous, her hips wide and her frame fuller than the wasp-waisted ideal that dominated every illustration in the catalogs that came through town. She had spent 23 years learning to hold her head high despite the mockery. But some days, the weight of other people's judgment felt impossible to bear. "I heard she actually wrote to one of those matrimonial agencies," the third woman, Elizabeth, added with false sympathy dripping from every word. "Wanting love like she is entitled to it. How pathetic." Rose's vision blurred with unshed tears as she hurried down Main Street, her boots kicking up small clouds of dust with each step. She had indeed written to a matrimonial agency 3 months ago, pouring her heart onto the page about her desire for companionship and genuine affection. The rejection letter had arrived within 2 weeks, suggesting she might have better luck seeking domestic employment rather than a husband. The words had carved themselves into her memory like initials in tree bark. She turned the corner past the saloon and nearly collided with a solid wall of muscle and worn leather. Strong hands steadied her by the shoulders, and she found herself looking up into a pair of striking blue eyes set in a sun-weathered face beneath a dusty hat. "Easy there, miss," the man said, his voice a low rumble that somehow managed to be gentle despite its roughness. "You all right?" Rose stepped back quickly, aware that she was still dangerously close to tears and not wanting to embarrass herself further in front of a stranger. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and the kind of broad-shouldered build that came from years of hard ranch work. His hands released her carefully, and she noticed the calluses on his palms and the dust coating his jeans and shirt. "I am fine, thank you," she managed, her voice barely steady. "I apologize for not watching where I was going." He tilted his head slightly, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "Name is Asher Finch," he said after a moment. "Just rode in from Sacramento." "You sure you are all right? You look like something shook you up pretty bad." The genuine concern in his voice nearly undid her completely. Rose swallowed hard and forced what she hoped was a convincing smile. "Just a difficult morning. Nothing I have not handled before." "Rose Valen," she added, remembering her manners despite her emotional state. "Welcome to Chico, Mr. Finch." "Asher is fine," he said, and something about the way he looked at her made her feel seen in a way she rarely experienced. Not judged or dismissed, just acknowledged as a person worth his attention. "You heading somewhere? I would be happy to walk with you if you need the company." Rose shook her head, not trusting herself to accept kindness from a handsome stranger without completely falling apart. "That is kind of you, but I should get home. My mother will be expecting me." She moved past him before he could respond, walking as quickly as she could without actually running. Behind her, she heard him say something else, but she did not let herself turn back to hear it properly. The last thing she needed was to develop feelings for someone passing through town who would inevitably disappoint her or, worse, pity her. The Valen home sat at the edge of town, a modest house with a vegetable garden that Rose tended with careful attention. Her mother, Catherine, looked up from her mending when Rose came through the door and immediately set her work aside. "What happened?" Catherine asked, rising from her chair with the kind of maternal instinct that could sense distress from across a room. Rose set her basket down and finally let the tears come. "The same thing that always happens. Martha and her friends making sure everyone knows how ridiculous I am for wanting what they all have." Catherine pulled her daughter into a tight embrace, stroking her hair like she had when Rose was a child. "Those women are cruel because their own lives disappoint them. Your wanting love is not ridiculous." "It feels ridiculous," Rose said against her mother's shoulder. "Every man in this town has made it clear I am not what they want. The matrimonial agency rejected me. Even strangers on the street can see that I am too much in all the wrong ways and not enough in all the right ones." "That is not true," Catherine said firmly, pulling back to look Rose in the eyes. "You are beautiful and kind and worthy of real love. The fact that narrow-minded people cannot see that is their failing, not yours." Rose wanted to believe her mother, but years of rejection and mockery had built walls around her heart that even maternal love struggled to breach. She wiped her eyes and moved to help put away the supplies she had purchased, trying to lose herself in the familiar rhythm of household tasks. That evening, as Rose helped her mother prepare supper, a knock came at the door. Catherine went to answer it and returned a moment later with a bemused expression and Asher Finch standing slightly behind her, hat in his hands. "This young man says he has something to return to you," Catherine said, curiosity evident in her tone. Asher stepped forward and held out a small cloth drawstring bag. "You dropped this when we ran into each other earlier. Figured you might need it." Rose recognized the bag immediately as the one containing the sewing thread and buttons she had purchased at the general store. She must have dropped it when she fled from him in her emotional state. "Oh, thank you so much. I had not even realized." "I asked around town to find out where you lived," Asher said, and there was something almost shy in the way he glanced between Rose and her mother. "Hope that was all right. Did not want you to have to go back and buy everything again." "That was very thoughtful of you," Catherine said warmly. "Would you like to stay for supper, Mr. Finch? It is the least we can do to thank you for your trouble." Rose shot her mother a look that clearly said, "What are you doing?" But Catherine ignored it completely, already ushering Asher toward the table. He hesitated, looking at Rose as if seeking her permission rather than her mother's. "I do not want to intrude," he said carefully. Rose found herself caught between wanting him to leave before she made a fool of herself and wanting him to stay because something about his presence made her feel less alone. "You went out of your way to return my things. Please stay." Supper was a simple affair of beef stew and fresh bread, but Asher ate like it was a feast, complimenting Catherine's cooking with obvious sincerity. He answered their questions about himself with an easy openness that Rose found refreshing after so many interactions with guarded, judgmental people. He was 26 years old, originally from a small ranch outside Sacramento. His father had died 2 years ago, and his older brother had inherited the family property. Rather than stay on as hired help working land that was no longer his, Asher had decided to strike out on his own. He had heard there were opportunities in the northern Sacramento Valley for someone willing to work hard, so he had come to Chico to look for ranch work or possibly buy a small piece of land if he could save enough. "What made you choose Chico specifically?" Catherine asked, passing him more bread. "Heard it was good cattle country," Asher said, "and that the town was growing but still had opportunities for newcomers. Figure I can work for someone else for a year or two, save my wages, and maybe find a piece of land to call my own." That is a good plan, Catherine said approvingly. There are several large ranches around here always looking for skilled hands. Do you have much experience? Been working cattle since I was 12, Asher said. Can handle horses, mend fences, work a brand. Pretty much whatever needs doing on a ranch, I can do it or learn it quick. Rose listened more than she spoke, watching the way Asher's hands moved when he talked, and the way his smile reached his eyes when he laughed at something her mother said. There was an authenticity to him that seemed rare, as if he had not learned to hide himself behind layers of pretense. "What about you, Miss Valen?" Asher asked, turning his attention to Rose. "What do you do here in Chico?" Rose felt her cheeks warm at the direct question. "I help my mother, and I do sewing and mending for some of the families in town. Nothing exciting." "Rose is being modest," Catherine interjected. "She is the finest seamstress in Chico. People come from neighboring towns to have her make their special occasion dresses." "That is impressive," Asher said, and he sounded like he genuinely meant it. "Takes a lot of skill to do that kind of work well." "It is just sewing," Rose said, uncomfortable with the praise even as part of her craved more of it. "It is art," Asher corrected gently. "Taking fabric and thread and making something beautiful that fits a person just right. That is creativity and precision together." Rose met his eyes across the table and felt something shift in her chest. No one had ever called her work art before. Most people treated her sewing as a useful service, nothing more. The way Asher looked at her when he said it made her feel like he saw value in her that extended beyond her utility. After supper, Asher helped clear the table despite Catherine's protests, then retrieved his hat and moved toward the door. Rose walked him out onto the small porch, the evening air still warm but losing some of its harsh edge as the sun set. "Thank you for returning my things," Rose said, folding her arms across her chest in an unconscious protective gesture. "And for staying for supper." "Thank you for having me," Asher said, settling his hat on his head. "Your mother is a wonderful cook, and the company was even better." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "Look, I know it is not my business, but this morning when I met you, you looked hurt." Real hurt, not just startled. Rose tensed, not wanting to discuss the incident with the three women. "It was nothing." "Did not look like nothing," Asher said quietly. "And I happened to be passing by the general store earlier when I was asking around about where you lived. I heard what those women were saying about you." Shame flooded through Rose so intensely she felt dizzy with it. "Then you know exactly how pathetic I am." "That is not what I heard at all," Asher said, and there was an edge of anger in his voice that surprised her. "I heard a bunch of mean-spirited gossips tearing down someone for having the audacity to want something they take for granted." Rose looked up at him, startled by the fierce defense in his tone. "They were just saying what everyone thinks." "Then everyone is wrong," Asher said flatly. He took a step closer, close enough that Rose could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "Wanting love is not pathetic, Rose. It is not ridiculous or embarrassing or any of the other things those women implied. You know what it is." She shook her head mutely, unable to look away from the intensity in his gaze. "It is the bravest thing you have done," Asher said, his voice dropping to something low and urgent. "Putting your heart out there knowing it might get broken, being honest about what you want even when people mock you for it. That takes real courage." Rose felt tears spring to her eyes again, but these were different from the ones she had cried earlier. These came from a place of unexpected hope, from hearing someone validate feelings she had been taught to be ashamed of. "You do not even know me," she whispered. "How can you say that?" "I know enough," Asher said. "I know you have kind eyes and a gentle way of speaking. I know you take care of your mother and work hard at something you are talented at. I know those women felt threatened enough by you to try to tear you down publicly. And I know that when you talk about wanting love, your whole face lights up even while you are bracing for rejection." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "That light in you, Rose, that is worth protecting. That is worth celebrating. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise." Rose could not speak around the lump in her throat. She nodded instead, trying to convey with that simple gesture how much his words meant to her. Asher smiled, soft and genuine. "I should let you get back inside, but I hope I will see you again while I am in town." "You will be staying?" Rose managed to ask. "For a while at least," Asher said. "Need to find work and a place to sleep that is not the ground behind the stable. Figure that will take a few days at minimum." "There is a boarding house on 2nd Street, Rose said, her practical side reasserting itself. "Mrs. Palmer runs it. She is fair with her prices and keeps a clean establishment." "I will check it out tomorrow," Asher said. "Thank you." He tipped his hat to her and walked down the porch steps, but turned back before he reached the gate. "Rose, those women were wrong about you, dead wrong. I wanted you to know that." Then he was gone, disappearing into the gathering darkness while Rose stood on the porch trying to understand what had just happened. A stranger had defended her, encouraged her, called her brave. Part of her wanted to dismiss it as empty flattery from someone passing through, but the sincerity in his voice and eyes made that impossible. Inside, Catherine was finishing the dishes with a knowing smile on her face. "He seems like a good man." "He is just being kind," Rose said, but even to her own ears it sounded like she was trying to convince herself. "He looked at you like you hung the moon," Catherine said mildly. "That was not just kindness, sweetheart. That was interest." Rose shook her head, not willing to let hope take root that firmly. "He will find work and realize I am not worth pursuing. They always do." "Or," Catherine said, drying her hands and turning to face her daughter fully, "he will get to know you and realize you are exactly as wonderful as I have always told you that you are. Do not close yourself off to the possibility, Rose. You deserve happiness." That night, Rose lay in bed replaying Asher's words over and over. "Wanting love is the bravest thing you have done." No one had ever framed her desires as courage before. Everyone else had made her feel weak and foolish for wanting what came so easily to others. But Asher had seen strength where others saw desperation, had seen value where others saw unworthiness. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart beat against her palm, and allowed herself the dangerous luxury of wondering what might happen if he meant what he said. The next morning dawned clear and hot, promising another scorching summer day. Rose rose early to help her mother with the washing before the heat became unbearable, and they worked together in the yard, scrubbing clothes against the washboard and hanging them on the line to dry. They were nearly finished when a figure appeared at the gate. Rose shaded her eyes against the sun and felt her pulse quicken when she recognized Asher, looking freshly washed and wearing a clean shirt, his hat in his hands. "Morning," he called out. "Hope I am not interrupting." "Not at all," Catherine said cheerfully before Rose could respond. "Come in, Mr. Finch." Asher approached with that easy confidence Rose was beginning to recognize as fundamental to his nature. "I took your advice and got a room at Mrs. Palmer's boarding house," he said to Rose. "And I heard that the Miller Ranch is looking for hands, so I am heading out there to see about work. Wondered if you could point me in the right direction." "North Road out of town for about 5 miles, Rose said, grateful to have a practical question to answer. "You will see the sign for Miller Ranch on the left. Cannot miss it." "Much obliged," Asher said. Then, with a slightly nervous edge that Rose found endearing, he added, "I was wondering if maybe when I get back to town, you might like to take a walk with me." If you are not too busy with your sewing work, I mean. Rose felt her mother's elbow dig gently into her ribs, a clear signal not to sabotage this opportunity. I would like that, she heard herself say. The smile that broke across Asher's face was bright enough to rival the California sun. That is great, really great. I will come by this evening then, if that is all right. That would be fine, Rose said, and meant it despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. After Asher left, Catherine practically dragged Rose inside. You are going to wear your blue dress, she announced. The one with the small flowers. It is just a walk, Rose protested, even as her heart raced with anticipation. It is a beginning, Catherine corrected. And you are going to look beautiful and let yourself enjoy the attention of a man who clearly thinks you are something special. Rose spent the rest of the day in a state of distracted anxiety, alternating between excitement and dread. She worked on mending a shirt for one of her clients, but had to redo several seams because her hands were shaking. What if she said something stupid? What if Asher realized during their walk that she was not worth his time? What if someone like Martha saw them together and said something cruel that made him see Rose the way the rest of the town did? By the time evening arrived, Rose had worked herself into a state of near panic. But Catherine helped her into the blue dress, styled her hair in a simple but flattering way, and gave her a firm hug. Be yourself, Catherine said. That is all you need to be. Asher arrived exactly when he said he would, looking slightly nervous himself, which somehow made Rose feel better. He offered her his arm, and they set off down the road together, the evening air finally cooling to something almost comfortable. For the first few minutes, they walked in silence, but it was not an uncomfortable silence. Rose found herself hyper-aware of the solid warmth of his arm under her hand and the way he adjusted his longer stride to match her pace. How did it go at Miller Ranch? Rose asked finally. Good, Asher said, and she could hear the relief in his voice. They hired me on the spot. Start tomorrow morning. It is hard work, long days, but the pay is fair and they provide meals. That is wonderful, Rose said, genuinely pleased for him. The Millers are good people. They treat their workers well. They walked past the edge of town and onto a path that led through a grove of oak trees, their leaves rustling in the evening breeze. The setting sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber, making the whole world feel suspended in a perfect moment. Can I ask you something? Asher said after a while. You can tell me it is none of my business if you want. Rose tensed slightly. All right. Why do those women hate you so much? Asher asked. And do not tell me it is because of how you look, because I am not buying that. There is something else going on there. Rose sighed, knowing she owed him honesty after he had been so kind to her. Martha was engaged to a man named Thomas about 5 years ago. He broke off the engagement a week before the wedding. The rumor Martha spread was that he did it because he had developed feelings for me. Had he? Asher asked, his tone neutral. No, Rose said firmly. Thomas barely knew I existed. He broke it off because he realized he did not love Martha and could not marry her, but Martha needed someone to blame and I was an easy target. The other women fell in line with her version of events, and I have been the villain ever since. That is ridiculous, Asher said flatly. That is Chico, Rose said with a bitter little laugh. Small town, long memories, and the truth matters less than a good story. Asher was quiet for a moment, and Rose worried she had said too much, revealed too much of her damaged social standing. But when he spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than judgmental. You know what I think, he said. I think you got blamed because you are exactly what Martha is not. You are genuine and kind, and you have not let bitterness make you cruel. That probably eats at her every day. Rose looked up at him, startled. I never thought of it that way. People who are happy with themselves do not spend their time tearing others down, Asher said. They just do not. So when someone goes out of their way to hurt you, it says everything about their pain and nothing about your worth. They had reached a small clearing with a fallen log that made a natural bench. Asher gestured to it. Want to sit for a bit? Rose nodded, and they settled side by side, not quite touching but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body in the cooling air. The sky above them was beginning to show the first stars, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "Tell me something about yourself that nobody knows," Asher said quietly. "Something real." Rose thought about deflecting, about keeping herself safe behind practiced walls, but something about the way Asher looked at her, with patience and genuine curiosity, made her want to be brave. "I write poetry," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "Terrible, sentimental poetry about love and hope and all the things I am supposed to be too practical to believe in. I hide the pages in the bottom of my sewing basket so my mother will not find them and worry that I am setting myself up for disappointment." Asher smiled. "I do not think your poetry is terrible. You have never read it," Rose pointed out. "Do not need to," Asher said. "If it comes from you, it probably has beauty in it. Maybe not technical perfection, but real feeling. That is worth more than perfect meter or fancy words." Rose felt her chest tighten with emotion. "You do not know me well enough to say things like that." "Maybe not," Asher agreed. "But I am a pretty good judge of character, and everything I have seen of you tells me I am right." He reached over and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "I know I just met you yesterday. I know I probably seem crazy for saying half the things I am saying. But Rose, I have met a lot of people in my life, and most of them are so busy pretending to be something they are not that you cannot ever see who they really are. You are not like that. You are real, and that is rare enough to be worth pursuing." Rose looked down at their joined hands, afraid to meet his eyes in case she saw pity there instead of the genuine affection his voice suggested. "I am not special, Asher. I am just a woman who wants what everyone wants and cannot seem to get it." "You are special to me," Asher said simply. "And maybe that does not mean much yet because we barely know each other. But I would like the chance to change that. I would like to get to know you, really know you. Not because I pity you or because I am trying to be noble, but because when I look at you, I see someone I want to spend time with. Someone I want to understand. Someone who makes me feel like maybe I found something I did not even know I was looking for." Rose finally looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of deception or mockery. All she saw was earnest hope and vulnerability that matched her own. "I am scared," she whispered. "I am scared to believe you and find out you are just being kind. I am scared to hope and have it hurt worse when it ends." "That is fair," Asher said. "I am scared too, scared I will mess this up somehow, scared you will decide I am not worth your time. But Rose, I would rather be scared and try than safe and always wonder what might have happened." The words from the night before echoed in Rose's mind. "Wanting love is the bravest thing you have done." Maybe this was her chance to be brave again, to take the risk despite the fear. "I would like to get to know you too," she said quietly. "But I need you to be patient with me. I have a lot of walls built up and they will not come down overnight." Asher squeezed her hand gently. "I am not going anywhere. Take all the time you need." They sat together as the stars came out in force, talking about small things and important things and everything in between. Rose learned that Asher loved horses more than cattle, that he had a younger sister who had married and moved to Oregon, and that his favorite meal was his late mother's apple pie. Asher learned that Rose dreamed of visiting San Francisco someday, that she could speak a little Spanish from their neighbor who had taught her as a child, and that she secretly loved thunderstorms, even though they were rare in California summers. When Asher finally walked her home, it was fully dark, and Rose felt like she had been on a journey much longer than a simple evening walk. He left her at her gate with a promise to come by again soon, and Rose floated into the house feeling lighter than she had in years. Catherine took one look at her daughter's face and smiled. "I take it the walk went well." "It did," Rose said, and could not stop herself from smiling back. "Mama, I think he might actually mean the things he says." "Of course he does," Catherine said, pulling Rose into a hug. "Now the question is, are you going to let yourself believe it?" Over the next few weeks, Asher became a regular presence in Rose's life. He would stop by after work at the Miller Ranch, often dusty and tired but always with a smile for her. Sometimes they would sit on the porch and talk while Rose did her sewing. Other times they would walk through town together, and Rose tried not to notice the stares and whispers that followed them. The gossip about her intensified, of course. Martha and her friends took gleeful pleasure in speculating about what a man like Asher could possibly see in someone like Rose. Some people suggested he was using her for something, though they could never quite agree on what. Others said he must be simple or desperate. The kinder souls thought he pitied her and was too polite to extract himself from an obligation he regretted. Rose tried not to let it bother her, but the constant commentary wore at her confidence. She found herself questioning Asher's motives, looking for signs that he was losing interest or regretting his attention to her. Asher, for his part, seemed oblivious to the gossip or simply did not care. He was unfailingly attentive and thoughtful, bringing Rose small gifts like wildflowers he found on the ranch or a ribbon from the general store that matched her eyes. He listened when she talked about her sewing projects and seemed genuinely interested in the details of her work. He made her laugh with stories about mishaps at the ranch and shared his own hopes and dreams for the future. One Saturday afternoon, about a month after they met, Asher arrived at the Valen house looking more nervous than Rose had ever seen him. He asked if they could take a walk, and Rose agreed, curious about what had him so unsettled. They headed to their usual spot, the clearing with the fallen log, but this time Asher seemed distracted, barely responding to Rose's attempts at conversation. When they sat down, he turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice serious, "and I need you to hear me out before you respond." Rose felt her stomach drop, certain he was about to end whatever was developing between them. "All right." "I have been saving my wages," Asher said. "Every penny I do not need for necessities I have been putting aside, and I have been talking to some people about land for sale in the area." Rose's heart started beating faster, though she was not sure why. "That is good. You said you wanted your own place." "I did say that," Asher agreed, "but my plans have changed a bit since I first came to Chico." He took a deep breath, his thumbs rubbing small circles on the backs of her hands. "Rose, I know it has only been a month. I know most people would say that is not long enough to be sure about anything, but I have never been more sure of anything in my life." "Sure about what?" Rose asked, though part of her already knew and was terrified to believe it. "I am in love with you," Asher said, the words coming out in a rush. "I love the way you see beauty in small things. I love how patient you are with your work and how kind you are to your mother. I love that you write poetry you think is terrible and the way you get excited when you talk about fabrics and patterns. I love your courage in wanting love even when the world tells you not to. I love everything about you, Rose, and I want to build a life with you." Rose felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. "Asher." "I am not done," he said, a smile breaking through his nervous expression. "I found a piece of land, 50 acres about 8 miles from here with a creek running through it and good grazing. There is a small house on it that needs work, but it is solid. I have enough saved for the down payment, and the owner is willing to carry the note for the rest. I can keep working at Miller Ranch while I build up my own herd, and in a few years we could have something real. Something that belongs to us. He paused, searching her face. But none of it means anything if you are not there with me. I am not asking you to give me an answer right now. I know you need time, but I needed you to know that I am serious about this, about you, about us. This is not a passing fancy or me being kind. This is me wanting to spend my life with you, if you will have me. Rose could not speak through her tears. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to throw herself into his arms and accept everything he was offering. But years of rejection and self-doubt held her back, whispering that this was too good to be true, that she should be careful, that she should protect herself. I do not know what to say, she finally managed. Then do not say anything yet, Asher said gently, wiping her tears with his thumbs. Think about it. Take all the time you need. I will be here. They sat together in silence for a long time, Rose's mind spinning with possibilities and fears. Finally, she looked up at him and asked the question that had been haunting her since the beginning. Why me, Asher? Really? I need to understand why you are choosing me when you could have anyone. Asher cupped her face in his hands, his expression infinitely tender. Do you want the list? Because I could go on for hours about all the specific things that make you incredible, but the real answer is simpler than that. He leaned his forehead against hers. You make me want to be better. You make me want to work harder and dream bigger and be the kind of man who deserves someone like you. When I am with you, everything feels right in a way it never has before. You are my person, Rose. I knew it the first day I met you, and every day since has just confirmed it. But I am not beautiful, Rose whispered. Not the way men want women to be beautiful. You are beautiful to me, Asher said fiercely. Every single inch of you, and anyone who cannot see that is a fool. Your curves are perfect. Your face is lovely. But even if you looked completely different, I would still love you because of who you are. Your body is just the packaging, Rose. It is your soul I fell in love with. Rose closed her eyes, letting his words wash over her, trying to believe them. I am scared. I know, Asher said. But do you remember what I told you that first night? Wanting love is the bravest thing you have done. Well, accepting it is even braver, and I believe you have that courage in you. Rose thought about her poetry hidden in her sewing basket, all those words about love and hope that she had been too afraid to speak aloud. She thought about her mother telling her she deserved happiness. She thought about all the years she had spent believing she was not enough, and here was someone telling her she was everything. Maybe it was time to be brave. I need a few days, she said finally, to think about everything. Not because I doubt you, but because I need to believe in myself enough to accept what you are offering. Take all the time you need, Asher said again. I will be right here. When he walked her home that evening, Rose felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump into unknown waters. The fear was still there, but beneath it was something else. Excitement. Hope. The terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, she was allowed to have the love she had always dreamed of. Catherine knew immediately that something significant had happened. She sat Rose down and listened as her daughter recounted everything Asher had said about the land and the house and the life he wanted to build with her. That is wonderful, sweetheart, Catherine said when Rose finished. So why do you look so conflicted? Because I want to say yes so badly it scares me, Rose admitted. What if I am making a mistake? What if he changes his mind? What if I am not capable of being what he needs? Catherine took her daughter's hands, her expression serious. Let me tell you something about your father. When he asked me to marry him, I was terrified. He was so much more worldly than I was, so confident and sure of himself. I thought I would disappoint him eventually, that he would realize he had chosen wrong. But you married him anyway, Rose said. I did, Catherine confirmed. And there were hard times, of course. Times when we struggled or disagreed or hurt each other without meaning to. But Rose, those years with your father were the best of my life. Not because everything was perfect, but because we chose each other every day. We worked through our problems together. We built something real. She squeezed Rose's hands. I see the same potential in Asher. He is a good man who loves you genuinely. Will there be challenges? Of course. But you are strong enough to face them. And the question is not whether you are capable of being what he needs. The question is whether you are willing to let yourself be loved. Rose absorbed her mother's words, feeling some of her fear ease. What if the town never accepts us? What if people always look at us and wonder what he sees in me? Then they are wasting their energy, Catherine said firmly. You cannot control what other people think, Rose. You can only control what you do with the life you have been given. And if you let fear of judgment stop you from accepting real love, you will regret it for the rest of your life. Rose knew her mother was right. She had spent so many years letting other people's opinions dictate her self-worth. Maybe it was time to start writing her own story instead of letting others write it for her. Over the next 3 days, Rose thought about little else. She went through her daily routines mechanically, her mind constantly circling back to Asher's proposal and what it would mean to accept it. She pulled out her hidden poetry and read through the verses she had written, seeing her own longing reflected back at her in ink and paper. On the 3rd evening, Asher came by as he had promised he would, looking hopeful and nervous in equal measure. Rose invited him to sit on the porch, and they settled into the chairs her mother had tactfully vacated. "Have you thought about what I said?" Asher asked quietly. Rose nodded, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "I have thought about little else." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I want to say yes. I want to accept everything you are offering and believe that we can build a life together. But I need you to understand something first." "Anything," Asher said, leaning forward intently. "I have spent my whole life being told I am not enough," Rose said, her voice shaking slightly. "And even though you say all these wonderful things, there is a part of me that does not believe them yet. That is going to take time. I am going to have moments where I doubt myself, where I question whether I deserve you, and I need to know that you have the patience for that." "Rose," Asher said, moving from his chair to kneel in front of hers, taking her hands in his. "I will spend every day for the rest of our lives showing you that you are more than enough. I will be patient for as long as it takes, and when you have doubts, I will remind you of the truth until you believe it." He looked up at her, his blue eyes bright with emotion. "Does that mean you are saying yes?" Rose felt tears spill down her cheeks, but for once they were tears of joy rather than pain. "Yes, I am saying yes to the land and the house and the life. Yes to you, Asher, to all of it." The smile that broke across Asher's face was brilliant. He stood and pulled Rose up with him, wrapping his arms around her in a tight embrace. "You have made me the happiest man in California," he said against her hair. Rose hugged him back, feeling the solid reality of him against her, and allowed herself to believe that this was real. That she was allowed to have this. That wanting love had not been foolish after all. When they pulled back, Asher kept his hands on her waist, looking down at her with such tenderness it made her breath catch. "Can I kiss you?" he asked softly. Rose nodded, not trusting her voice. Asher cupped her face gently and lowered his lips to hers in a kiss that was sweet and careful and full of promise. Rose melted into it, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart beating as rapidly as her own. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Asher rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Rose Valen. I am going to make sure you never doubt that." "I love you too," Rose whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating to say aloud. "I think I have loved you since that first day when you told me I was brave." They stood together on the porch as the sun set, holding each other and talking quietly about the future. Asher explained that he had already started the process of buying the land and hoped to close the deal within the next 2 weeks. He wanted to marry Rose as soon as possible, but understood if she wanted to wait and plan a proper wedding. "I do not need anything elaborate," Rose said. "I just need you and my mother and maybe a few witnesses. The people in this town have made it clear they do not wish me well. I see no reason to invite them to celebrate with us." "Whatever you want," Asher said, "though I think you might be surprised by how many people will be happy for us." The gossips are always the loudest, but they are not the majority. Catherine came out eventually, pretending she had not been listening from just inside the door. She hugged them both, crying happy tears and immediately starting to plan despite Rose's protests about not needing a fuss. "My only daughter is getting married," Catherine said firmly. "There will be some fuss, even if it is just the 3 of us and a nice supper afterward." The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Asher finalized the purchase of the land and took Rose to see it on a Sunday afternoon. The property was even more beautiful than he had described, with rolling hills dotted with oak trees and a clear creek running through the lower section. The house was small but well built, with 2 bedrooms and a main room that would serve as both kitchen and living space. "It needs work," Asher admitted as they walked through the empty rooms. "New windows, fresh paint, repairs to the porch, but the bones are good." Rose walked from room to room, already imagining how they could make it into a real home. "It is perfect," she said, and meant it. "I can sew curtains for the windows. We can get some furniture from the second-hand shop in town. And look, there is enough space in this corner for a sewing table." Asher came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "I was hoping you would keep doing your sewing work. I know some people think wives should not work outside the home, but your talent is too valuable to waste, and the extra income will help us build the ranch faster." Rose leaned back against him, feeling grateful for his support. "Some of the clients might not want to work with me once we are married. Martha will make sure of that." "Then they are not worth your time," Asher said. "Besides, I bet you will get new clients from some of the ranch families in the area. They do not care about town gossip. They just want someone who does good work." They spent the afternoon walking the property, Asher pointing out where he planned to put up fencing and build a small barn. He talked about starting with a few cattle and some horses, gradually building up the herd as they could afford it. Rose listened and offered suggestions, feeling more excited about the future than she had ever thought possible. They set a date for the wedding 3 weeks away, enough time for Catherine to make Rose a dress and for Asher to get the house habitable. Rose chose a simple design in cream-colored fabric, with lace at the collar and sleeves that she stitched herself with painstaking care. True to Asher's prediction, not everyone in town was unkind about their upcoming marriage. Mrs. Palmer from the boarding house stopped by to offer congratulations and brought a set of dishes as a wedding gift. Several of the ranch families Rose did sewing for expressed their happiness and assured her they wanted to continue working with her. Even the minister who would perform the ceremony, Reverend Thompson, was warmly supportive, but the negative voices were loud enough to be hard to ignore. Martha made sure Rose knew that she thought the whole thing was ridiculous, predicting that Asher would come to his senses within a year. Other women whispered when Rose passed by, speculating about what she must have done to trap such a handsome man into marriage. The worst incident came a week before the wedding. Rose was at the general store picking up supplies when Martha cornered her near the fabric section, flanked by Caroline and Elizabeth. "I just want to make sure you know what you are doing," Martha said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Asher Finch is too good for you, Rose. He is going to realize it eventually, and when he does, you are going to be left alone and humiliated. It would be kinder to everyone if you called off this farce now." Rose felt the old familiar shame trying to rise up, but this time she had Asher's words to armor herself with. "Wanting love is the bravest thing you have done. Accepting it is even braver." "I appreciate your concern, Martha," Rose said, keeping her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. "But I am going to marry Asher, and we are going to be very happy. I am sorry that upsets you, but it is not going to change my plans." Martha's eyes narrowed. "You think you won, do not you? You think you got something the rest of us could not have. But mark my words, Rose, this will end badly for you." Or, a new voice interjected, "it will end exactly the way a good love story should end." Rose turned to find Mrs. Palmer had come up behind them, her expression stern. "Martha, you have been tormenting this girl for years over something that was not her fault to begin with. It is time to let it go. Thomas did not leave you for Rose. He left you because you were cruel and petty even then. The fact that you have only gotten worse over the years just proves he made the right choice." Martha's face flushed bright red. "How dare you?" "I dare because someone needs to say it," Mrs. Palmer said firmly. "Rose has done nothing to you except exist. She found someone who loves her for exactly who she is, and instead of being happy for her, you are trying to poison it with your jealousy. That says everything about your character and nothing about hers." She turned to Rose and smiled. "Do not let bitter people steal your joy, dear. You have every right to be happy." Martha and her friends left in a huff, and Rose felt tears of gratitude stinging her eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Palmer. You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," Mrs. Palmer said. "I am tired of watching good people get torn down by gossips. Besides, I like Asher. He stays at my boarding house, remember? I have seen how he talks about you. That young man is truly in love, and you deserve to enjoy it without people trying to ruin it." The incident shook Rose, but it also strengthened her resolve. She was going to marry Asher. She was going to build a life with him, and she was not going to let anyone else's bitterness corrupt that. The day of the wedding dawned clear and beautiful, one of those perfect late September days when the summer heat had finally broken, and the air held just a hint of autumn. Rose woke early, her stomach fluttering with nerves and excitement. Catherine helped her dress, tears streaming down her face as she buttoned up the back of the cream-colored gown. "You look beautiful, sweetheart." Rose looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized her reflection. The dress fit her curves perfectly, and Catherine had styled her hair with small white flowers woven through the curls. She did not look like society's ideal of beauty, but for the first time in her life, she felt beautiful anyway because she was marrying a man who loved her exactly as she was. The ceremony was small, held in Reverend Thompson's church with only a handful of people in attendance. Mrs. Palmer was there, along with a few of the ranch families Rose had sewn for. Asher's boss from Miller Ranch came, and even the banker who had helped with the land purchase showed up to offer his congratulations. But when Rose walked down the aisle and saw Asher standing at the front in his best clothes, his face lighting up like she was the most precious thing he had ever seen, none of the other people mattered. There was only him, looking at her like she hung the stars in the sky. Reverend Thompson kept the ceremony simple and heartfelt. When it came time for the vows, Asher took Rose's hands in his and spoke the traditional words with such sincerity that she had to blink back tears. Then it was her turn, and she promised to love and honor him with a voice that shook with emotion but never wavered. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thompson said with a smile. "Asher, you may kiss your bride." Asher cupped Rose's face in his hands and kissed her softly, mindful of their audience but unable to hide the depth of feeling between them. When they pulled apart, Rose saw that his eyes were suspiciously bright. "Hello, wife," he whispered. "Hello, husband," Rose whispered back, and felt joy bubble up inside her like champagne. Catherine had arranged a small reception at the Valen house, with food and drink for their few guests. Rose found herself laughing and talking more freely than she had in years, bolstered by Asher's constant presence at her side and the genuine warmth of the people who had come to celebrate with them. As the afternoon wore into evening and the guests began to depart, Asher leaned down and murmured in Rose's ear, "Ready to see our home, Mrs. Finch?" Rose loved the sound of her new name. "More than ready." They said goodbye to Catherine, who hugged them both tightly and tried not to cry at the thought of her daughter leaving her house. "You come visit me often," she instructed Rose. "And Asher, you take good care of my girl." "I promise," Asher said solemnly. "She is the most precious thing in the world to me." Asher had borrowed a wagon from the Miller Ranch for the occasion, and he helped Rose up onto the seat before climbing up beside her. They had already brought most of Rose's belongings out to the house over the past week, so the wagon held only a few last-minute items and the basket of food Catherine had packed for them. The ride to their property took about 45 minutes, and Rose spent the time snuggled against Asher's side, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched the landscape roll by. The evening air was cool and pleasant, and the first stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. When they finally arrived at the house, Rose saw that Asher had clearly been working hard to make it welcoming. The porch had been repaired and swept clean, and there were lanterns lit inside that cast a warm glow through the new windows. He had even picked wildflowers and put them in a jar on the table inside. "Oh, Asher," Rose said, her voice catching. "It is perfect." He lifted her down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her up into his arms. "Have to carry my bride over the threshold," he said with a grin. Rose laughed and wrapped her arms around his neck as he carried her into the house. It was small but cozy, and she could see all the work he had done to make it ready for her. Fresh paint on the walls, curtains she had sewn herself already hung, a few pieces of simple but sturdy furniture arranged to make the most of the space. Asher set her down gently and lit a few more lanterns, illuminating the main room. "I know it is not much yet," he said, suddenly sounding uncertain, "but we will make it better over time, I promise." Rose turned to him and took his hands. "It is already perfect because you are here. We are here together. That is all I need." Something in Asher's expression shifted, becoming more intense. "Rose, I want you to know something before this night goes any further." "What is it?" she asked. "You are beautiful," he said, moving closer and running his hands down her arms. "Every part of you, your face, your body, your soul. I know you do not believe it yet, not completely, but I am going to spend tonight and every night showing you until you do believe it." Rose felt heat rise in her cheeks but did not look away. "I am not what men usually want." "You are what I want," Asher said firmly. "Your curves are gorgeous. The softness of your body is perfect. And beyond the physical, Rose, your heart is the most beautiful thing I have ever encountered. You are everything to me." He leaned down and kissed her, deeper this time than he had in the church, and Rose felt herself respond with a passion she had not known she possessed. His hands spanned her waist, pulling her closer, and she let herself sink into the sensation of being wanted, being desired. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Asher rested his forehead against hers. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Rose said, and this time the words came easily. That night, Asher proved his words with actions, showing Rose with gentle hands and whispered endearments that every part of her was cherished. He took his time learning her body, treating her with reverence and patience, making sure she felt safe and valued every moment. And Rose, who had spent so long believing she was unworthy of physical affection, discovered that being loved completely was more healing than she ever could have imagined. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed Asher had built with his own hands, Rose's head resting on his chest while he traced lazy patterns on her back. "Happy," he murmured into her hair. "Happier than I knew was possible," Rose said honestly. "I keep waiting to wake up and discover this was all a dream." "It is real," Asher assured her. "You are my wife. This is our home. We are building a life together, all real." Rose tilted her head up to look at him. "Thank you for being patient with me. For seeing past all the reasons I gave you to walk away." "There were no reasons," Asher said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Only excuses other people tried to give me that I was never going to accept. You are worth fighting for, Rose, worth waiting for, worth everything." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time in years, Rose did not have nightmares about rejection and loneliness. Instead, she dreamed of a future filled with love and possibility. The next few months passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. Asher continued working at Miller Ranch while also building up their own property. Rose divided her time between keeping their house, working on her sewing commissions, and helping Asher whenever she could with ranch tasks. They bought their first cattle in November, a small herd of 6 cows and a bull. Asher was as proud as if they were made of gold, and Rose could not help but catch his enthusiasm. They also acquired 2 horses, one for riding and one for work, and Asher began teaching Rose to ride. "I am going to fall," Rose protested the first time he tried to get her on the horse. "Then I will catch you," Asher said simply, and proceeded to patiently instruct her until she could sit the horse comfortably. By the end of the month, she was riding well enough to accompany him around the property, and she loved the freedom of it. Their closest neighbors, the Harrison family, proved to be friendly and welcoming. They had a ranch about 3 miles away and came by shortly after Rose and Asher's wedding to introduce themselves. They had 2 teenage children and a warmth about them that put Rose immediately at ease. "We are so glad to have young folks settling in the area," Mrs. Harrison said. "It gets lonely out here sometimes. You must come by for supper soon." The Harrisons became good friends, and Rose was grateful for Mrs. Harrison's company and advice about managing a ranch household. The older woman had none of the petty cruelty that characterized Martha and her friends, and she treated Rose with genuine kindness and respect. Winter came, mild by the standards of other places, but cold enough that Rose and Asher were grateful for the fireplace and the thick quilts on their bed. They spent long evenings talking and planning, dreaming about how they would expand the ranch over the years. "I want to add another room eventually," Asher said one night as they sat before the fire. "Maybe 2 rooms, one for a proper parlor and one for when we have children." Rose's hand went instinctively to her stomach. They had been trying for a baby since the wedding, and she had started to wonder if perhaps she was not able to conceive. "What if we cannot have children?" Asher pulled her closer against his side. "Then it will be you and me, and that will be enough." "I want children with you, Rose, but I married you for you, not for the potential family we might have." "I want them too," Rose admitted. I want to give you sons and daughters. I want to fill this house with love and laughter." "We already have love and laughter," Asher pointed out. "Everything else is a bonus." In February, Rose woke up feeling queasy and dizzy. At first, she thought she had eaten something that disagreed with her, but when the feeling persisted for several days, Mrs. Harrison came by and took one look at her before declaring she was almost certainly pregnant. Rose did not let herself believe it at first, too afraid of the disappointment if Mrs. Harrison was wrong. But when a month passed and her courses did not come, she finally allowed herself to hope. When she told Asher, he picked her up and spun her around despite her protests, then immediately set her down and fussed over her like she was made of glass. "I am pregnant, not dying," Rose laughed, but she loved his attentiveness anyway. "You are carrying our child," Asher said, his hand splayed across her still flat stomach. "That is the most precious thing in the world to me." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Rose battled morning sickness well into her 4th month. Asher was endlessly patient, holding her hair when she was sick and bringing her crackers and ginger tea when she could not stomach anything else. He took over more of the household tasks without complaint and fretted constantly about whether she was overworking herself. "You are going to drive me crazy if you keep hovering," Rose told him one afternoon when he had asked for the 3rd time if she needed to lie down. "Cannot help it," Asher said unapologetically. "You are precious cargo now." "I was precious before," Rose pointed out. "True," Asher agreed, pulling her into his arms carefully. "But now there are 2 of you to worry about." As Rose's pregnancy became visible, she braced herself for the inevitable gossip and cruel comments when they went into town. But to her surprise, most people were kind. Even some of the women who had previously ignored her offered congratulations and advice. It seemed that motherhood, even impending motherhood, granted her a measure of acceptance she had never had before. Martha, of course, was the exception. The one time Rose encountered her during those months, Martha looked her up and down with obvious disdain. "Pregnancy certainly suits you," Martha said, her tone making it clear she did not mean it as a compliment. "You look even larger than before." Rose felt the familiar sting of shame start to rise, but then she felt the baby move inside her, a firm kick against her ribs. She placed her hand over the spot and smiled. "I am carrying my husband's child," Rose said calmly. "A child who was created from love and will be born into a home filled with love. I cannot imagine anything better." She walked away before Martha could respond, and later she told Asher about the encounter while they lay in bed. "I am proud of you," Asher said, his hand resting on her swollen belly, "for standing up for yourself and for our family." "I am learning to be brave," Rose said. "You taught me that." "You always had it in you," Asher corrected. "I just reminded you to use it." The baby, a healthy boy with Asher's blue eyes and a shock of dark hair, was born on a warm October evening in 1883. The labor was long and difficult, with Mrs. Harrison serving as midwife and Asher pacing the floor of the main room like a caged animal. When Mrs. Harrison finally emerged holding the baby and told him he had a son, Asher practically ran into the bedroom. Rose was exhausted and pale, but she smiled when she saw him and held out her arms. "Look what we made," she whispered as Asher carefully climbed onto the bed beside her, staring at the tiny bundle in her arms with wonder. "He is perfect," Asher said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are perfect. I cannot believe how lucky I am." They named him Thomas William Finch, honoring Asher's father and Rose's late father. Little Tommy, as they quickly started calling him, was a good baby who nursed well and slept in reasonable stretches. Rose threw herself into motherhood with the same dedication she brought to everything else, learning quickly despite her inexperience. Asher was a devoted father from the start, rising in the night to bring Tommy to Rose for feedings and walking the floor with him when he was fussy. He sang to his son in a surprisingly good voice and talked to him constantly, telling him about the ranch and the horses and all the things they would do together when Tommy was older. "You are going to teach him to be a good man," Rose said one evening, watching Asher cradle their sleeping son. "We are going to teach him together," Asher corrected. "He needs both of us." The first year of Tommy's life was exhausting but joyful. Their little family settled into rhythms and routines, and the house that had seemed so empty when they first moved in now felt full of life. Asher had managed to save enough to buy more cattle, and their herd had grown to 20 head. They were still small by ranch standards, but they were making steady progress toward their dreams. Rose continued to do sewing work when she could, though her client list had shifted. Several of the town women had indeed stopped using her services, but she had picked up enough work from ranch families in the area that she stayed busy. And the ranch families paid better and were far more pleasant to work with. When Tommy was 18 months old, Rose discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. And when their daughter was born in the spring of 1885, it felt like their family was complete. They named her Elizabeth Catherine Finch, after Asher's mother and Rose's mother. Little Eliza, as they called her, had Rose's softer features and light brown hair that curled just like her mother's. Tommy was fascinated by his baby sister and wanted to help with everything. Though at 2 years old, his help often created more work than it saved. Catherine Valen, who had visited regularly since Tommy's birth, practically moved in for the first few weeks after Eliza's arrival. She helped with the children and the household while Rose recovered, and watching her mother dote on her grandchildren filled Rose with a contentment she had never imagined possible. "You have a beautiful family," Catherine said one afternoon as they sat on the porch watching Asher play with Tommy while Eliza slept in Rose's arms. "I am so proud of you, sweetheart." "I could not have done any of this without you believing in me," Rose said. "You always told me I deserved love. I just had to learn to believe it myself." "And now?" Catherine asked. Rose looked at her sleeping daughter, then at her husband and son playing in the yard, then at the house and land they had built together. "Now I believe it. I believe I am worthy of all this love. And more than that, I believe I have earned it by having the courage to accept it when it was offered." The years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and small milestones. Tommy grew into an energetic boy who loved the ranch and the animals, following his father everywhere and asking endless questions. Eliza was more reserved but intensely observant, with a creative streak that reminded Asher of Rose's hidden poetry. In 1887, when Rose was pregnant with their third child, Asher finally had enough saved to build the addition he had talked about years before. They added 2 rooms to the house, one that became a proper parlor and the other a bedroom for the children to share. It made the house feel more spacious and gave them room to grow. Their third child, another boy they named Aaron, was born that winter. He was an easy baby with a sunny disposition, and Tommy and Eliza both adored their new brother. The house rang with noise and laughter, and sometimes when Rose stood in the doorway watching her children play, she had to stop and remind herself that this was really her life. The ranch continued to grow as well. By 1888, they had 50 head of cattle and several good horses. Asher had hired a young man to help with the work, and they were producing enough to not only support the family comfortably, but to save for future expansion. The land they had bought for almost nothing had increased in value as more settlers came to the area, and they were now considered one of the established ranching families in the region. Rose's sewing business had evolved as well. She had stopped taking routine mending work and focused instead on special commissions, making wedding dresses and fine clothing for women who appreciated her skill and were willing to pay premium prices. She had more work than she could handle and had to turn people away, which gave her a sense of pride and accomplishment she had never felt when she was desperate for any work she could get. The town's attitude toward Rose had shifted over the years as well. It was hard to maintain gossip about someone who was clearly thriving. Martha and her friends still made occasional snide comments, but they had lost their audience. Most people in Chico now knew Rose as Asher's wife, a skilled seamstress, and the mother of 3 beautiful children. Her earlier reputation as an object of pity and mockery had faded into irrelevance. One summer day in 1889, Rose and Asher took the children into town for supplies. They were loading the wagon when Martha appeared, looking older and more bitter than Rose remembered. "Rose," Martha said, her voice tight, "I heard your ranch is doing well." "It is," Rose said cautiously, wondering where this was going. "We have been blessed." "I suppose you think you proved everyone wrong," Martha said, and there was something almost desperate in her tone. "You got your happy ending while the rest of us are still struggling." Rose studied the other woman and saw past the cruelty to the unhappiness beneath. Martha had never married, had never found the love she had lost when Thomas left her. She had spent years being bitter and mean, and it had isolated her even from the friends who had once supported her. "I do not think about proving anyone wrong," Rose said honestly. "I think about my family and my work and making a good life. I am sorry you are struggling, Martha, truly. But my happiness is not what is causing your unhappiness. Only you can change that." Martha's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment Rose thought she might actually apologize or show some vulnerability. But then the familiar hardness returned. "You always were too soft," Martha said and walked away. Asher, who had been helping the children into the wagon, came over and put his arm around Rose. "You all right?" "I am," Rose said, and realized she meant it. Martha's words did not hurt anymore because Rose knew her worth now. She had a husband who loved her, children who adored her, work that fulfilled her, and a life she had built through courage and determination. What anyone else thought about it simply did not matter. That evening, after the children were in bed, Rose and Asher sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Asher held her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm like he always did. "You remember the day we met?" Rose asked. "Every detail," Asher said. "You ran into me looking like your world was ending. I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen." "I was crying," Rose pointed out. "You were real," Asher corrected. "In a world full of people pretending to be something they are not, you were completely, honestly yourself." "How could I not fall in love with that?" Rose leaned her head on his shoulder. "I almost did not let myself believe you meant it. I almost let fear stop me from accepting what you were offering." "But you did not," Asher said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You were brave enough to take the risk. And look what we built because of that courage." "We built a life," Rose said softly. "A real, full, beautiful life." "The best life," Asher agreed, "and it is only going to get better." In 1891, Rose gave birth to their 4th and final child, another daughter they named Margaret. She was a quiet baby with Asher's blue eyes and a tendency to watch everything with solemn attention. The other children welcomed her enthusiastically, and the house seemed to expand somehow to accommodate the extra chaos. By then, Tommy was 8 years old and already helping with ranch work in small ways. Eliza, at 6, had started learning to read and devoured every book they could get for her. Aaron, at 4, was the family troublemaker, always getting into mischief but so charming about it that he rarely got in real trouble. Catherine Valen had moved into the house with them the previous year, her own health beginning to decline in ways that made it unwise for her to live alone. She occupied the second bedroom in the addition, and having her there brought Rose immense comfort. Catherine loved being surrounded by her grandchildren and helped with their care despite her advancing age. Rose's sewing work had evolved again. She now occasionally took commissions from as far away as Sacramento, making elaborate dresses for wealthy women who had heard of her skill. The income from these special projects gave them the financial security to hire more help for the ranch and to start planning for the children's futures. One evening in the spring of 1893, Asher came in from working on the ranch and found Rose sitting at her sewing table, but instead of working on a commission, she was writing. He came closer and saw that she was working on one of her poems, the one she used to hide from everyone. "Can I read it?" he asked softly. Rose hesitated, then handed him the page. It was a poem about love, about the journey from loneliness to belonging, about the courage it takes to accept joy when you have been taught to expect pain. Asher read it slowly, and when he looked up his eyes were bright with emotion. "Rose, this is beautiful, really beautiful." "It is just something I do," Rose said, still uncomfortable accepting praise for her poetry. "It is art," Asher said, echoing the words he had spoken years ago about her sewing. "And it is good art, Rose." "Have you ever thought about trying to publish any of these?" Rose laughed. "Who would want to read my poetry?" "I would," Asher said seriously. "And I bet a lot of other people would too. There is truth in your words, Rose, real emotion. That is valuable." Rose tucked the poem away, not quite ready to believe that her private writings could have public worth. But Asher's encouragement planted a seed. Maybe someday she would be brave enough to share her poetry with the world. For now, it was enough to know that her husband valued it, that he saw worth in this part of her, just like he saw worth in all the other parts. The children grew and changed with each passing season. Tommy developed into a serious, hard-working boy who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Eliza showed artistic talent, filling pages with drawings and stories that displayed remarkable imagination. Aaron was the charmer, able to talk his way out of trouble and make friends with everyone he met. And Margaret, as she grew from baby to toddler, revealed a stubborn streak and a determination that reminded everyone of Rose herself. Catherine Valen passed away peacefully in her sleep in the winter of 1895, surrounded by the family she loved. Rose grieved deeply for her mother, but she also felt grateful that Catherine had lived to see her daughter truly happy, had spent years with her grandchildren, and had died knowing that Rose had found the love and belonging she had always deserved. They buried Catherine in the small cemetery outside Chico, and Rose planted roses on her grave every spring. Standing at the funeral, surrounded by her husband and children, Rose reflected on how much her mother had believed in her, even when Rose could not believe in herself. That faith had made all the difference. By 1897, the Finch Ranch was one of the most successful small operations in the area. They had expanded their property to nearly 200 acres and ran over 100 head of cattle. Asher had hired 3 permanent hands to help with the work, and they had built a proper barn and several outbuildings. The house had been expanded again, adding a 3rd bedroom and a larger kitchen. Tommy, now 14, worked the ranch like a man despite his youth. He had his father's eye for cattle and his mother's patience, and Asher had started teaching him about the business side of ranching. It was clear that Tommy would eventually take over the ranch, and he approached that future responsibility with seriousness and pride. Eliza, at 12, had shown such academic promise that Rose and Asher had enrolled her in a boarding school in Sacramento. It had been a difficult decision, but they wanted to give her opportunities they could not provide at home. She came home for holidays and summers, full of stories about her studies and bursting with ideas and enthusiasm. Aaron, at 10, was already declaring he wanted to be a lawyer or politician when he grew up. He had a gift for oratory and could argue any position with convincing passion. Rose suspected he would indeed end up in a profession that used his verbal skills, though whether that would be law or politics or something else entirely remained to be seen. Margaret, at 6, was learning to read and already showing interest in her mother's sewing. She would sit beside Rose for hours, watching her work and asking questions about stitches and patterns. Rose loved these quiet moments with her youngest daughter, seeing glimpses of herself in Margaret's focused concentration and careful attention to detail. One evening in the late summer of 1898, Rose and Asher celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner after the children had gone to bed. They sat at the table they had brought from Sacramento 16 years before, drinking wine from glasses that had been a wedding gift from Mrs. Palmer. 16 years, Asher said, raising his glass, to the best decision I ever made. To the bravest thing I ever did, Rose countered, remembering his words from that first evening on her mother's porch. They clinked glasses and drank, and then Asher reached across the table to take her hand. "You remember how scared you were?" he asked gently. "How certain you were that you did not deserve love?" "I remember," Rose said. "Sometimes I still cannot quite believe this is my life. That I have you and our children and all of this." "Believe it," Asher said, bringing her hand to his lips and kissing her knuckles. "You did not just accept love, Rose. You built a life with it. You took what we had and made it into something incredible. This ranch, these children, the family we created together, that is all you as much as it is me." Rose felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears. "We did it together." "We did," Asher agreed, "and we will keep doing it together for the rest of our lives." The years continued their steady march forward. Tommy grew into a man and took over more of the ranch operations, eventually marrying a sweet young woman named Sarah from a neighboring ranch. They built a small house on the Finch property and started their own family, making Rose and Asher grandparents at ages that still felt impossibly young. Eliza finished her education and shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to be a teacher. She took a position at the school in Chico and became known for her innovative methods and genuine care for her students. She never married, claiming she was too busy with her work and her writing to bother with romance, though Rose suspected her daughter's independence came more from choice than lack of opportunity. Aaron did indeed become a lawyer, moving to Sacramento and opening a practice that quickly gained a reputation for taking on cases for people who could not afford high legal fees. He married late, choosing a fellow lawyer who was as passionate about justice as he was, and together they became a formidable team both in court and in life. Margaret learned her mother's sewing skills and eventually surpassed them, developing such talent that she opened her own dress shop in Chico. She married a kind banker who supported her business ambitions, and together they raised 3 daughters who all inherited their mother's artistic eye. Rose and Asher grew older gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year. They stayed active on the ranch long after they should have retired, working alongside Tommy and helping raise their growing number of grandchildren. Rose's hair turned gray, and her body grew softer still with age. But Asher never stopped looking at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. In 1912, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children's spouses, and 8 grandchildren ranging in age from infant to teenager. The celebration was held at the ranch, with long tables set up in the yard and more food than they could possibly eat. Tommy stood up to make a toast, his voice carrying easily across the gathering. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught me what real love looks like. They showed us that love is not about perfection. It is about choosing each other every day, even when it is hard. It is about building something together that lasts. And it is about being brave enough to accept love when it is offered, even if you are scared." Rose looked at Asher and saw her own emotions reflected in his eyes. They had built something that would outlast them, a family rooted in love and strengthened by the courage it had taken to create it. As the celebration continued around them, Asher leaned over and whispered in her ear, "Still glad you took the risk." Rose looked around at the life they had built, at the children and grandchildren who existed, because she had been brave enough to accept love 16 years ago. She thought about the girl she had been, mocked and dismissed and certain she would never have the life she dreamed of. And she thought about the woman she had become, confident and loved and surrounded by proof that courage could transform everything. "It was the best decision I ever made," Rose said, turning to kiss her husband softly. "You told me wanting love was the bravest thing I had done. But accepting it, building this life with you, that is what really took courage. And I would do it again in a heartbeat." "I love you, Rose Finch," Asher said, his voice still holding the same sincerity it had held 3 decades before. "Every day for 30 years, and every day for however many we have left." "I love you too," Rose said, and the words still felt like a miracle every time she said them. They stayed at the party for hours more, dancing with their grandchildren and laughing with their children and basking in the tangible proof of a life well lived. And later that night, when everyone had gone home or to bed and the house was quiet, Rose and Asher sat on their porch just as they had on their first night as husband and wife, holding hands and watching the stars. "No regrets?" Asher asked, though he already knew the answer. "Not a single one," Rose said firmly. "We built something beautiful, Asher, something that will last long after we are gone. Because you were brave," Asher reminded her. "Because you let yourself want love and then accepted it when it found you." Rose squeezed his hand, thinking about all the people in her life who had contributed to her journey. Her mother who had believed in her, Mrs. Palmer who had defended her, the ranch families who had given her work and friendship, her children who had filled her life with purpose and joy. And most of all, this man beside her who had seen her worth when she could not see it herself. "I was brave," Rose agreed, "but you made it possible. You gave me something worth being brave for." They sat together in comfortable silence, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built a love story that defied every expectation. The girl who had been mocked for wanting love had become a woman who had more love than she had ever dreamed possible. And the cowboy who had told her that wanting love was brave had spent 30 years proving that accepting it was even braver. As the years advanced into their 70s, Rose and Asher finally accepted that they needed to slow down. They handed full control of the ranch to Tommy, though they still spent time with the cattle and horses when their health allowed. Their days fell into a peaceful rhythm of gardening, reading, playing with great-grandchildren, and simply enjoying each other's company. Rose finally gathered the courage to share some of her poetry, publishing a small collection with help from Eliza. It was not a commercial success, but the few people who read it responded to the genuine emotion and the honest voice that ran through every verse. Rose did not mind that it did not make her famous. It was enough that she had been brave enough to share it at all. In the spring of 1920, as the world was changing in ways they could never have imagined when they first met, Rose and Asher celebrated their 38th wedding anniversary quietly at home. Both were in their 70s now, their bodies bearing the marks of long lives well lived. They sat on their porch, the same porch where Asher had first told Rose that wanting love was brave, and watched the sunset paint the California sky in brilliant colors. "You know what I am most proud of?" Rose asked, her voice softer with age but no less certain. "What is that?" Asher asked, his hand finding hers automatically. "That we made it," Rose said. "Everyone said I was foolish to want love. They said I was not enough, that no one would ever choose me. But we proved them all wrong, Asher. Not out of spite or revenge, but just by living our lives and loving each other. We built something real and lasting, and nothing anyone said could stop that." "You were always enough," Asher said, his thumb tracing the familiar circles on her palm. "I just had to convince you to believe it." "You did more than that," Rose said, turning to look at him fully. "You taught me that wanting love is not weak, that accepting it is brave, that I am worthy of joy and belonging and all the things I had been taught to stop hoping for. You changed my whole life, Asher Finch." "We changed each other's lives," Asher corrected gently. "You taught me patience and kindness. You showed me what real courage looks like. You made me a better man, Rose. Everything good in my life came from the day I ran into you on that street in Chico." They sat together as darkness fell, talking quietly about their lives and their memories and the family they had created. They talked about their children's successes and their grandchildren's futures. They remembered Catherine and all she had done to help them start their life together. They recalled the early struggles and the hard-won victories, the joy and the sorrow, all the moments that had woven together into a life. "If you could go back," Asher asked, "and do it all over again, would you change anything?" Rose thought about the question seriously, considering all the pain and fear that had preceded their meeting, all the struggles they had faced along the way. But when she looked at the life they had built, at the legacy of love they were leaving behind, the answer was easy. "Not a thing," Rose said firmly. "Every moment, good and bad, brought us here, and this is exactly where I want to be." "Me too," Asher said, pulling her close and kissing the top of her head. "You and me, Rose, always." As the stars came out above the ranch they had built together, Rose Finch felt a contentment so complete, it seemed to fill every cell in her body. She had started as a girl who was mocked for wanting love, who was told she was not worthy of the very thing her heart craved most. But she had found the courage to keep wanting it anyway, and when love finally came in the form of a dusty cowboy with kind eyes, she had been brave enough to accept it. That bravery had changed everything. It had given her a partner, a family, a life of meaning and purpose. It had shown her that she was not too much or not enough, but exactly right for someone who truly saw her. And it had taught her that sometimes the most radical act of courage is simply letting yourself be loved. Rose and Asher Finch lived several more years, surrounded by family and sustained by the love they had nurtured for nearly 4 decades. When Rose finally passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1923, at the age of 64, Asher followed her less than a year later. The doctor said it was his heart, but everyone who knew them understood. He had simply decided he did not want to spend his remaining time without his wife by his side. They were buried together in the cemetery outside Chico, their graves marked by a simple stone that read, "Rose and Asher Finch, beloved parents and grandparents." Below that, their children had added a line from one of Rose's poems. "We were brave enough to love, and that made all the difference." The Finch Ranch continued for generations, passed down from Tommy to his children and beyond. The house was expanded and modernized over the years, but the original structure remained, a testament to the foundation that Rose and Asher had built. Their descendants told and retold the story of how Rose and Asher met, how he had defended her and encouraged her, and loved her so completely that she learned to believe in her own worth. The story became a legend in the family, a reminder that love requires courage, and that being brave enough to accept it when it is offered can change everything. Young Finch daughters who struggled with self-doubt were told about their great-great-grandmother who had been mocked for wanting love but found it anyway. Finch sons who worried about being good enough were reminded of their great-great-grandfather who had seen worth in someone everyone else dismissed and built a life on that foundation. The poetry Rose had published, while never famous in her lifetime, found new readers decades later when a descendant discovered the original collection and republished it with biographical context. Modern readers responded to the authenticity of her voice, to the journey from doubt to belief, to the honest depiction of what it meant to be a woman who dared to want more than society said she should have. Scholars studying women's voices in the Old West discovered Rose's poems and used them to illustrate the emotional lives of women who were so often reduced to stereotypes in historical accounts. Rose's words gave depth and texture to those women's experiences, showing that they felt and dreamed and struggled in ways that transcended their historical moment. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of Rose and Asher's story was not in any book or historical record. It was in the countless lives that were touched by their example of what real love looked like. It was in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who learned that worth came from within, not from others' judgments. It was in the couples who faced their own struggles and remembered that courage and commitment could overcome almost any obstacle. The ranch itself, even as it changed and modernized, remained a place where love and family were valued above all else. Visitors to the property could feel it in the air, that sense of being somewhere that had been consecrated by genuine devotion. The land itself seemed to remember the young couple who had started with almost nothing except each other and built something that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes. In the end, Rose and Asher's story was not about a curvy woman overcoming mockery or a cowboy playing hero. It was about two people who found each other and chose each other and built a life together on the foundation of mutual respect, genuine affection, and the courage to be vulnerable. It was about learning that wanting love is not shameful and accepting it is not weakness. It was about discovering that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let yourself be seen, fully and honestly, by someone who will cherish what they find. Their story proved that love does not require perfect bodies or perfect circumstances or perfect timing. It requires only honest hearts, genuine courage, and the willingness to build something together one day at a time. Rose Valen, the woman who was mocked for wanting love, became Rose Finch, the woman whose love story would inspire generations. And Asher Finch, the cowboy who told her that wanting love was brave, spent his life proving that accepting it was even braver. Together, they showed that the most powerful love stories are not the ones that come easily, but the ones that are fought for, believed in, and nurtured through all the challenges life brings. They showed that being different or unconventional or outside societal norms does not make someone unworthy of love. And they showed that sometimes, when you are brave enough to want what your heart desires despite all the voices telling you not to, The universe rewards that courage with more than you ever imagined possible. The California sun still rises over the Finch Ranch every morning, illuminating land that has been worked by 5 generations of the family Rose and Asher started. The house still stands, expanded but recognizable, sheltering descendants who carry forward the values of courage and love that their ancestors embodied. And on quiet evenings, when the family gathers on the porch to watch the sunset, the oldest members still tell the story of Rose and Asher, making sure that no Finch ever forgets where they came from or what their family is really built on. In a world that often tells people they are not enough, that their desires are foolish, that love is only for certain types of people, the story of Rose and Asher stands as proof that none of that is true. Love is for anyone brave enough to want it and courageous enough to accept it when it finds them. And sometimes, all it takes is one person seeing your worth to help you see it yourself. Rose Valen walked down a dusty street in Chico, California in 1882, believing she was unworthy of love. She met a cowboy who told her that wanting love was the bravest thing she had done. And together, they built a life that proved bravery is always rewarded, courage always matters, and love, real love, can transform everything it touches. Their story ends with both of them gone, resting side by side in the cemetery outside the town where they met. But in another sense, their story never ends at all. It continues in every descendant who finds the courage to love authentically. It continues in every person who hears their story and realizes they too are worthy of affection and belonging. It continues in the ranch they built, and the family they created, and the legacy of genuine devotion they left behind. Because the truth Rose and Asher discovered together, the truth they lived every day of their marriage, is one that echoes across time. Wanting love is brave. Accepting it is braver still. And building a life on that foundation of courage and commitment creates something that can never truly be destroyed, something that matters far beyond any individual lifetime, something that changes the world in small but profound ways that ripple out indefinitely into the future. That is the real happy ending, the one that matters most. Not just that Rose and Asher found love and lived happily, though they did, but that their love created more love, inspired more courage, and showed everyone who knew them or heard their story that it is always worth being brave enough to want what your heart truly desires. That is a legacy that lasts forever, a gift that keeps giving long after the original givers are gone. And so the story of the curvy woman who was mocked for wanting love, and the cowboy who told her that wanting love was brave becomes more than just their story. It becomes everyone's story, a reminder that we all deserve love, we all have the capacity for courage, and we are all worthy of building lives filled with joy and meaning and authentic connection. Rose and Asher showed us the way. Now it is up to each of us to be brave enough to follow it.